The year is 1944, and war is raging in every corner of the globe. Back from his exile to Broadway, and determined to relaunch his Hollywood career at 20th Century Fox, director Otto Preminger is about to face down his own greatest conflict as he comes head-to-head with Daryl F. Zanuck and assembles a remarkable collection of dopes who shall never forget the weekend Laura died. We've got Dana Andrews in the basket and Waldo Lydecker in the bathtub on this week's episode as we discuss the 1944 film noir classic, Laura.
Now, do I have your full attention?
Screw you.
Hello to Yogi, hello to Boo Boo, hello to Scooby Doo. Barney and Fred say.
Don't forget your goat leggings.
Well, pardon me, all over the place.
Eddie, what are you doing?
The best I can!
How did you get the money and how did you get the woman? What do you think?
There's always magic at the movies.
What's in the basket?
I don't know if you guys saw this about Maisel Day, but Amazon did a promotion here in LA to do throwbacks with different businesses so that prices were like 50s prices. And so they had 30-cent gas at a gas station, but they picked a gas station that's right off the exit for the 10 freeway in Santa Monica, which is one of the most congested stretches of any highway, probably in California. Possibly in the entire country. And they had to shut it down within, I think, about like 45 minutes because it was completely impeding traffic. And also it started at 9 a.m.
Another great idea from Jeff Bezos.
So people had been lining up for hours at that point, and there was no, rush hour traffic could not get through. And it was a disaster. And people were just like screaming on Twitter about it, how they're all going to be late for work. So, classic Amazon.
Once again, something we would do.
I mean, on the plus side, we wouldn't underpay our workers, so...
That's true. We also wouldn't have those weird Twitter bots to talk about how...
I love those. Those are fucking crazy.
Basket cast fan listener Mandy, I am not being imprisoned. I am not chained to a radiator in a salt mine in Utah right now. I have not been forced to mine Bitcoin for the last 6 months.
I must say, for a charming, intelligent girl, you certainly surrounded yourself with a remarkable collection of dopes.
Hello, welcome to What's in the Basket. I'm Tiff, and this week we're talking about Laura from 1944, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Amelia.
Hi.
And Candace.
Howdy.
So, with the benefit of 3/4 of a century's hindsight, the 1944 20th Century Fox film noir Laura is now largely regarded as the singular and perhaps most iconic work of its producer-director Otto Preminger. The events that led to Preminger's spearheading of the film, however, are nowhere near as straightforward as its reputation as his masterpiece would suggest. Laura is a movie that was plagued by power struggles from day one, a mishmash of clashing personalities and second-choice casting decisions that by all rights should have failed miserably. Instead, and to the surprise of just about everyone involved, it was a box office hit and critical success that has only gained in esteem through the intervening decades, both a crucial milestone in the careers of its cast and crew, as well as a defining entry in the film noir genre as a whole. Once again, as with Frank Henenlotter and Basket Case, I'd like to take us back very briefly to the early life of Otto Preminger to provide a little historical context for where he, and by association Laura, and really any number of 1940s noirs directed by European and frequently Jewish expats came from. Preminger was born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, specifically in present-day Ukraine, in 1905. He was the son of a public prosecutor, and though Preminger himself was not religious in his adult life, his family was Jewish. Eastern Europe was naturally a turbulent place to live during this period, and the Preminger family fled to Austria, first to Graz and later Vienna, in the beginning stages of the First World War. I bring up Preminger's origins in wartime and interwar Austria because it's interesting to note the unique worldview that was brought to Hollywood by exiled European filmmakers like Preminger, Fritz Lang, Billy Wilder, writer Robert Siodmak and others, men who were instrumental in the rise of film noir, a genre that combined moody visual styles influenced by German expressionism with a general disillusionment with the human condition. Of course, noir is rarely outright political, but there's an obvious line to be drawn between the golden age of the genre and the fact that many of its key figures had come of age in the prelude to the Holocaust and were presently watching the brutality of the Second World War unfold from the comparable safety of Hollywood. So, Preminger was in his 20s and working as an actor and director on the Vienna theater scene when he first encountered the head of 20th Century Fox, Joseph Schenck. It was common during this period for Hollywood studio executives to scout for talent in Europe, and it was on one of these trips that Schenck secured an interview with Preminger in 1935. He was invited to Hollywood and arrived in the United States in 1936. This is when he first met Daryl F. Zanuck, the co-founder and production chief at Fox, who had previously worked as a screenwriter during the silent era, which will become important later on.
I know he was a bit of a dickbag.
Yeah.
And I know that he went through women like... I can't come up with a good metaphor. What would be a good metaphor for somebody tearing through vaginas? I don't know. No, he was Zanuck was a bit of a playboy, and I know that he was meddlesome. And like you're going to go into, obviously, yeah, Preminger had a lot of trouble with Zanuck, but I think that was kind of characteristic of how Zanuck approached directing, kind of across the board. Like he thought of himself not just as being a studio chief, but also as like helming the movies that came out from his studio directly, and that was not oftentimes like wise or like really beneficial creatively.
Yeah, he saw himself as a creative force, from what I gather from this research, as sort of having more of a say than he necessarily should have had, and being a... He saw himself definitely as like the screenwriter in charge on this one.
Very like Goldwyn. He's got like a whole like Goldwyn thing. How Goldwyn thought that he was personally responsible for the success or failure of his movies, mostly the successes. He was eager to take credit for those. He's got a lot of Goldwyn in him, I would say.
I mean, that's the same with any kind of CEO or like any kind of leader of anything. They're very keen to take credit for successes and to push our failures onto other people.
So Zanuck initially assigned Preminger to direct 2 minor romantic comedies, the Lawrence Tibbett musical Under Your Spell, and a screwball comedy with Ann Sothern and Jack Haley called Danger, Love at Work. I haven't seen either of those. I don't know if you guys have.
That's a bad title.
Yeah.
I haven't seen them, but yeah.
They sound like the kind of movies no one's seen.
Yeah.
They were followed in 1937 by the Robert Louis Stevenson adaptation Kidnapped, which one-time screenwriter Zanuck had scripted himself, of course. It was to star Warner Baxter and Freddie Bartholomew, and Zanuck was determined that Preminger should direct, even though Preminger had never heard of the novel and felt that he was the wrong guy to direct a picture set in the Scottish Highlands, which I think was a fair assessment on his part.
I mean,
Warner Baxter in the Scottish Highlands. Ugh.
Still, the nature of the studio system was such that he had no real choice in the matter. So he took the assignment, and this is where the tensions that you might expect from, a collision of 2 domineering assholes began to arise. Within days of the start of production, Zanuck was screening the dailies and accusing Preminger of deviating from his script. Preminger, meanwhile, insisted that he had been totally faithful, leading Zanuck to double down, all of which escalated into a full-fledged screaming match between the 2 men in Zanuck's office, ending with Zanuck ordering Preminger to leave and Preminger slamming the door on his way out. So from this point on, it became increasingly clear to Preminger that he had turned himself into something of a pariah on the Fox lot. He was effectively blacklisted by Zanuck and ultimately wound up leaving Hollywood for New York entirely to direct on Broadway.
Quitter.
Yeah.
I say go. Fuck that.
Yeah, he just fucking bailed. For several years, actually. Several years passed, with Preminger's stint in Hollywood appearing to have been just a total bust. He had gone back to the stage, and with time, once again found success there. So he was still directing in New York when Zanuck went overseas to London to work for the British Army Film Unit in 1941. And in Zanuck's absence, the task of running 20th Century Fox went to the executive William Getz. So at this point, Preminger is still, extremely banned from Fox by Zanuck, who has no interest in not being, a petty bitch who holds onto a grudge for literally almost a decade. But Zanuck's in England. He has no actual say over what goes on right now. So Getz decides to get a little weaselly with it. He invites Preminger back to Hollywood based on his successful track record on Broadway. And Preminger begins a quest to find a property that he can develop before Zanuck gets back. So he wants to, squeeze one in while he's weaseled his way back onto the lot.
While Zanuck's in Europe squeezing some out.
I can't believe you were saying I was the worst and that I said the worst things. When you
You're
just
the worst
say these
person who's
things
ever lived.
all the time.
So So he starts rifling through the Fox story department with Getz's encouragement and settles on 2 projects, a screenplay titled Army Wives and the Vera Caspary novel Laura. So Army Wives went into production first with Preminger directing and was released as In the Meantime, Darling, another movie I will probably never see. But Zanuck beat the clock on Laura and came back to Fox right on time to be like, no, absolutely not. You are not directing. I banned you from directing. You're not doing this. So he relents enough to let Preminger produce on Laura, but he will not let him direct it.
God, what a petty bitch. Oh.
Yeah, this is 1944, and their conflict had been in 1937, so it's been a while to still be holding this grudge. So yeah, just in case this ego trip between Preminger and Zanuck isn't enough, conflict also quickly arose between Preminger and Vera Caspary. They had actually met earlier in New York when Caspary was shopping around the script that would later become her novel, which was then titled Ring Twice for Laura. Bit less catchy.
Yeah, bad title. No one can title things. What is happening?
The postman always
rings Laura twice.
Rings Laura twice.
Preminger was interested in the story's basic premise, but in true Preminger fashion was very willing to point out everything that he felt was wrong with it. So they went their separate ways, and Caspary wound up collaborating with the playwright George Sklar to turn out a script that they hoped to tour with Marlene Dietrich in the title role. However, even with Dietrich's potential involvement, there were no takers. So eventually Caspary adapted the script into a novel, which Fox purchased the rights to for $30,000, or about $550,000 today, which is a pretty decent payout.
That's pretty sweet.
She complains later on, and I would probably take the $500,000, but all right, Vera. This, of course, opened the door for Preminger to have another stab at shaping Laura according to his vision, which was clearly not in line with Caspary's. In his role as producer, Preminger worked with screenwriters Jay Dratler, Samuel Hoffenstein, and Betty Reinhardt to develop a screenplay with virtually no contributions from Caspary. The novel used multiple narrators to tell the story of Laura, a young woman thought to have been murdered, who later shows back up and essentially becomes a suspect in her own murder. Preminger believed the multiple narrator device was too convoluted for a streamlined suspense film and limited the narration to the single character of Laura's mentor, Waldo Lydecker.
I can't say that he made a bad call with that one. I think that multiple narrators would probably muddy the waters.
Zanuck, though, ever the backseat writer, inserted himself into this dynamic as an unsolicited script doctor. He gave Preminger a taste of his own medicine with such recommendations as, and this is serious, making Lydecker into a morphine addict.
As opposed to just like a beefcake addict. Which is what he is.
Oh, fucking hell. How did Zanuck even make a good movie?
Zanuck's junkie Lydecker angle was ultimately shot down, but nevertheless, Caspary was appalled by the final screenplay. She demanded to know why her novel was being made into a B-picture and took issue with the script's depiction of Detective Mark McPherson as a gritty cop in a trench coat, rather than the debonair detective that she'd created. For his part, Preminger stated in his autobiography that he felt, quote, no obligation to be faithful to the book when adapting a novel for the screen. So Preminger doesn't give a shit.
No.
He doesn't give a shit. I mean, knowing how it turned out, I'm like, he wasn't wrong though. So
yeah, I can't like hold anything against him really in this, because he was on the right side of history with this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like, it's popular entertainment, you know, it's not like, you know, he was adapting like a Melville novel or something. I mean, Vera's, I think, a little overrating the artistic significance of her decisions.
Well, the fact that she only turned it into a book when she couldn't sell it as a script, it's like,
yeah,
you know, it wasn't going to be fine literature.
Despite Caspary's objections, the project continued full steam ahead. Zanuck approved the screenplay, even without his cool morphine subplot. And Laura was boosted to A-picture status under his personal supervision, which, of course, was both a blessing and a curse for Preminger. He still wouldn't allow Preminger to direct, so it fell to Preminger as producer to find a director himself. This turned out to be more difficult than expected, as virtually no one on the Fox lot wanted to touch the movie with a 10-foot pole. Most notably, Lewis Milestone turned down the project with a note to Zanuck that read, quote, Preminger probably knows what to do with the script. He should direct it. I won't. In the end, the job went to Ruben Mamoulian, an established director known for films like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Queen Christina, Golden Boy, and The Mark of Zorro. Asked why he believed Mamoulian had taken the job that no one else wanted, Preminger politely speculated that he, quote, wanted the money.
I mean, good a reason as any.
At this point, production hadn't even started, and already Laura was a tangled web of conflict between Preminger, Zanuck, and Caspary, though she had no real influence to speak of. Mamoulian dove headfirst into this mess the moment he arrived on the scene by pointedly ignoring Preminger, just as Preminger was pointedly ignoring Zanuck and Caspary, and the first cracks appeared during the casting process. So this is where some beloved characters show up in the narrative. For the role of Laura's mentor, Waldo Lydecker, Zanuck and Mamoulian wanted the character actor Laird Krieger, a bulky villain type who had just come off a successful turn as Jack the Ripper in The Lodger. Preminger was totally thrown by this suggestion and insisted that Lydecker must be played either by an unknown or by someone with no history of bad guy roles, if the final twist, which of course is that Lydecker was the murderer, spoiler alert, was going to work. So Zanuck stuck to his guns, but so did Preminger. Neither of them was going to go down without a fight. During the casting process for Laura, a touring production of Noel Coward's Blithe Spirit arrived in Los Angeles, headlined by Broadway star Clifton Webb.
The man himself.
Hold that gangplank. Hold up the gangplank. Hold it, I'm coming.
Well, I made it.
Hold up the gangplank.
I made it. Here I am, bound for America. Now, let me get used to that wonderful fact. I, Charles Condamine, am going to America, land of the free and home of the brave. I'm not brave. Perhaps I wouldn't be here if I were. But I'm free. Free at last. Free of women and free of, ghosts. I'm escaping from a situation that, well, maybe I better begin at the beginning. It's quite a story, you know.
Webb was a sophisticated dandy type. He was already in his 50s with 3 decades of stage work and some appearances in silent films under his belt. Accounts vary between the two of them as to when Webb and Preminger first met. Webb recalled being introduced to Preminger by Tallulah Bankhead during Preminger's New York years, while Preminger claimed he had neither heard of nor seen Webb prior to Blithe Spirit.
Oh, fuck. Wow.
Preminger, I have no memory of this man.
I've never heard the song Easter Parade in my life. I have no idea.
On the avenue, 5th Avenue, the photographers will snap us, and you'll find that you're in the rotogravure. Oh, I could write a sonnet about your Easter bonnet, and of the girl I'm taking to the Easter parade.
In any case, Preminger was greatly impressed by Webb's performance in the play, saying, quote, "I was fascinated by Clifton Webb. I felt he must play this part, and I told him so." Preminger, therefore, effectively offered the role of Waldo Lydecker to Clifton Webb without so much as consulting Zanuck.
God, every decision he makes, I'm like, I can't say he made the wrong one.
Yeah.
There's some big brass balls to bring somebody into the production who hasn't had a film role since, like 1925, I think is the last time that Clifton Webb had made a movie in Hollywood.
Webb's recollections of the circumstances that led to his being cast in Laura are very much in character, very Waldo Lydecker Goes to Hollywood. On the night that Blithe Spirit opened in Los Angeles, he remembered Moss Hart telling him, "I bet after you open in the play tonight, you'll have plenty of movie offers." To which Webb replied, according to his own recollection, mind you, "I wouldn't work in this blankety-blank place if they gave me $1 million a week."
I wonder what really got him on board. Like, if he was just like, well, your first scene is you in a bathtub exposing yourself to somebody. And Clifton was like, oh, well, actually.
It's when he found out that he was going to be exposing himself to Dana Andrews, specifically.
Yeah, that'll come into play, actually.
Oh, boy.
Oh, goody.
Oh, goody.
Recounting his first meeting with Preminger, Webb said, "I thought it would be stupid to stamp my foot and say no. So I said, it depends entirely on the picture and the part. He said, well, if you did a part, what kind of part would you like to do? And I said, a charming son of a bitch. So he lifted a script from his desk and handed it to me. It was called Laura. So I read it and obviously realized it was a wonderful part and right up my street." Offering the role to Webb without consulting Zanuck was, of course, an extremely risky move on Preminger's part. He was met with staunch and sometimes homophobic resistance, unsurprisingly. One casting director, Rufus Lemaire, said they couldn't possibly use Webb because he, quote, flew. This argument did nothing to dissuade Preminger. It was precisely Webb's upper crust effeminacy contrasted with the brutish masculinity of a Laird Krieger type that made him perfect for the role in Preminger's eyes. Zanuck surprised Preminger by ordering a screen test for Webb and even allowed Preminger to direct it, but Webb complicated matters by refusing to test with Gene Tierney and insisting upon doing a scene from Blythe Spirit instead of one from Laura.
Fucking hell.
Oy.
Nevertheless, however, Webb's test impressed Zanuck, and Webb, who had insisted that he wouldn't work in this blankety-blank place if they gave him $1 million a week, was given the role of Waldo Lydecker.
Gotta love a man who sticks to his guns.
Oh, it's also funny, I'm just going to say, throw it in here, that Zanuck wanted Laird Krieger because he doesn't want a homosexual. Like, well, I hate to break the news to you, but
yeah,
got a little bit of inside. I mean, Zanuck knew, obviously, but I guess I don't know. I guess he thought that it was not a particularly queer screen personality that Krieger had, which is funny because when you look at it in retrospect, it's like he absolutely does. But whatever.
Yeah,
I don't think Zanuck has a lot of good insight in anything, though.
No.
So the part of Laura herself was originally intended for Jennifer Jones, who had just won an Oscar for her starring role in The Song of Bernadette. However, Jones was at this time romantically involved with David O. Selznick, who advised her to turn it down. She took his advice and was sued by Fox for almost $9 million today.
Whoa.
But the suit was ultimately settled.
I mean, Selznick cost her a lot of money because Selznick died in debt, too. She was fucked over multiple times by Selznick's bad fiscal sense. Ladies, get you a man who knows how to balance a checkbook.
The whole Selznick thing in general was a bad choice.
Yeah, God, that was a weird union, I definitely have to say.
So the second choice for Laura was Gene Tierney, a 23-year-old Fox starlet who had been discovered by Zanuck 4 years earlier, performing on Broadway in The Male Animal. She'd made her screen debut opposite Henry Fonda in The Return of Frank James, and had since starred in a handful of films, including Heaven Can Wait in 1943. When she received the script for Laura, Tierney hadn't worked in some months, having taken time off to embark on a USO tour while pregnant with her first child. It was on this tour that Tierney contracted German measles, and as a result of the illness, her baby, Dario Cassini, was born partially blind, deaf, and mentally disabled, and in arguably one of the most tragic parables for the dangers of fame, Tierney would later encounter a fan on the street who happily recounted the story of the time she was under quarantine with German measles and busted out to meet a movie star. So every time I hear that one, I'm just like, holy fuck.
It's the worst. It's the worst one. Like, yeah. She really didn't fucking deserve all of that shit. It fucked her up so much.
Are so weird when it comes to celebrities, and I guess it's good to know that we've always been like that, and it's not some sort of modern innovation with people going on Twitter being like, R.I.P. to your grandma, Stan Luna. You know, we've always just been fucking wild and out, giving Gene Tierney German measles.
But in early 1944, the full extent of baby Daria's health problems, which would later leave her institutionalized for most of her life, were not yet apparent, and Tierney was looking to stage her comeback in order to retain her popularity as a viable Fox player. She liked the Laura script, but had some issues with the role of Laura herself. She was concerned with both the somewhat insignificant screen time and the fact that Jennifer Jones had turned it down. In her autobiography, she wrote, quote, "If Jennifer Jones doesn't want it, I asked Daryl Zanuck, why should I? The role is right for you, Gene," Zanuck assured me. "You'll be good in it, and you'll see this one will help your career. I had a hunch he might be right, and I always tried to play to my hunches." So she took the role.
Finally, someone with some good insight.
For the role of Mark McPherson, the young detective investigating Laura's murder, who finds himself falling in love with her portrait, Zanuck wanted John Hodiak. However, and John Hodiak is one of those like second-tier leading men. He was in like Lifeboat and The Harvey Girls. He's got that big mouth. I never understood him.
Oh, he's got a huge mouth. Yeah, no, it's enormous.
Honking mouth. However, another Fox player was actively pursuing the part. Dana Andrews had been given the Laura script by Louis Milestone on the set of The Purple Heart during the period when Preminger was searching for a director. Dana was the Texas-raised son of a Baptist minister who had at this point been appearing in movies for 4 years, including a supporting role in the Gary Cooper-Barbara Stanwyck comedy Ball of Fire, and a small but pretty impressive performance in the Henry Fonda-William Wellman western The Oxbow Incident.
Mr. Davis, will you find someone you can trust to look out for my wife and children? You better take some older woman along. It's not going to be easy.
Don't worry. Your family will be all right.
My parents are dead, but Miriam's live in Ohio. Kincaid didn't want to sell those cattle, so maybe his wife will buy them back for enough to cover that travel.
Tie them up.
I suppose it's no good telling you again that we're innocent.
No good.
It's not for myself I'm asking.
Other men with families have had to die for this sort of thing. It's too bad, but it's justice.
Justice? What do you care about justice? You don't even care whether you've got the right men or not. All you know is you've lost something and somebody's got to be punished. I tell you, there's nobody to look out for them. They're in a strange place. Can't you understand that, you butcher? This is a fine company for a man to die with.
Shut up! You shut up! You shut up!
However, he had yet to break through as a leading man, and Milestone was convinced that Mark McPherson was the role that would do it. Dana agreed and went so far as to have Hedda Hopper campaign for him in her column. He got a major boost when Zanuck's wife visited the set of Wing and a Prayer and was so taken with Dana that she convinced Daryl Zanuck to give him the role.
Dana wanted the role so bad that he was willing to ally himself with a Republican like Hedda Hopper.
Literally, Hedda fucking Hopper.
Yikes, I mean, a fucking fascist, effectively. And Dana's like, oh, I don't know about this, but oh, I really, really want this part. Class traitor, Dana Andrews.
Look, he makes up for it later.
Oh, yeah.
He was using it. It was all a ploy.
That's so true. Ugh, we stan.
Unbothered king.
We stand unbothered king. We stand a man who manipulates crypto-fascists to get roles in Fox melodramas.
The cast of Laura was rounded out by Judith Anderson as Laura's aunt Anne Treadwell and Vincent Price as Laura's fiancée Shelby Carpenter. Anderson had been nominated for a Best Supporting Actress Oscar in 1940 for her performance as Mrs. Danvers in Hitchcock's Rebecca, while Price had been in Hollywood for about 6 years, mainly playing supporting roles in period pictures. Price and Webb had known each other on Broadway in the 30s, and it's actually likely Webb advocated on Price's behalf for the role in Laura, so...
Because again, he had a little bit of a crush.
A little bit. I am also realizing now that I left out Bessie.
Oh.
And
we stand.
Come in, Miss Clary.
Never mind the Miss Clary stuff. My name's Bessie, and I'm a domestic, and I got nothing to be ashamed of.
Sit down, Bessie.
Her letters. And her private diary. You've been reading them, pawing over them. It's a shame in the face of the dead. That's what it is. It's a shame.
Sit down, Bessie.
I'll stand on my own 2 feet. Don't you go ordering me around. I ain't afraid of cops. I was brought up to spit whenever I saw one.
Okay. Go ahead and spit. That'll make you feel better.
That's Dorothy Adams, and she was friends with Dana because they had worked together at the Pasadena Playhouse. They had both studied together at the Pasadena Playhouse in the 30s. And that's part of the reason why McPherson and Bessie have those, like, tender, like, little moments, like when he smiles at her when she's freaking out and, like, you know, when she's leaving the apartment and he gives this, like, oh, it's okay, go on. You know, whatever, because that's Dana and Dorothy Adams' friendship coming out on the screen.
Yeah, you can really see their camaraderie. It's very nice.
Yeah. It's because she's the only other working class person in the movie.
Yeah.
And McPherson's like a comrade. Anyway, yes, that's a little bit I know about Dorothy Adams.
Finally, after about 100 years of bullshit, it was time to start production on Laura. Filming began in April 1944 under the direction of Reuben Mamoulian. Webb's first day of filming since the silent era found him half naked for the opening scene, in which Lydecker is interrogated by McPherson while he sits in the bathtub where he writes his columns. Webb recalled, quote, "While I was sitting, waiting to be called, a young man came up to me and made himself known. He was Dana Andrews. He was very friendly and warm and put me at my ease. I was naturally nervous, but trying to appear completely detached. I sat in that bloody tub for 2 days in hot water until at the end of the day I had shriveled like a prune. All the stagehands were most courteous, and the property men couldn't do enough for me to make things easier and comfortable. They brought me coffee and Coca-Cola. When I saw myself in the rushes, sitting in the bathtub looking very much like Mahatma Gandhi, I felt I might vomit. After it was over, Dana saved my life with a big swig of bourbon. The first shock of seeing myself had a strange effect on me psychologically, as it made me realize for the first time that I was no longer a dashing young juvenile, which I must have fancied myself being through the years in the theater. I would like to remind you that Clifton Webb was in his 50s already when this happened."
Oh, fuck.
Oh, the man didn't own a mirror.
He just, like, it's like when you see a picture of yourself and you're like, do I really look like that? But, like, he had just not seen an image of himself for, like, 25 years.
Yeah, because he had a painting up in the attic and he thought it was working.
He has a picture of fucking Dorian Gray, like...
And it's not doing shit that whole time.
In that scene, it's such a strange way to be introduced to his character, but I guess it is very in keeping with like how Waldo Lydecker sees himself, and like he won't cut his bath short to meet with a flat-footed detective. Like he doesn't see that as being on his level, so he's not going to mess up his own life to do it. But it's just like, it's very like weird. It's just so weird. And also he gets out of the tub and exposes himself completely to Dana Andrews. Dana doesn't even look away.
Exactly. Like, McPherson just does not truck with this whole thing at all. He just, like, throws the washcloth at Waldo, and then Clifton climbs out, and then Dana's just making exactly, like, unbroken eye contact with him.
And as I said before, when we were watching it, I said Clifton would love Lush today.
He would.
The little stuffed over chair in that bathroom is also so funny to me. Like the idea of having like living room furniture so that you can put your naked ass on it once you get out of the shower.
But also like
I want to be Waldo.
When Dana is like walking through the apartment, McPherson is walking through the apartment, and he like picks up something, and Waldo is like, don't mess with that. And it's like, how can you see? That's a wall. You have to go through a closed door to get to Waldo. How can you see that? Do you have X-ray vision? What's happening?
Yeah, he traded his youth for X-ray vision.
Waldo's X-ray specs.
I also like when Dana walks into the bathroom and Lydecker tells him to take a seat, and he walks right past the squishy little chair and goes for the little like spindly kitchen chair, and he turns it around and like straddles it completely unnecessarily.
Like he's a high school counselor gonna rap with some kids.
Yeah.
This is so funny. God, that whole opening monologue is honestly, I think it's the best opening monologue in any movie ever.
I shall never forget the weekend Laura died. A silver sun burned through the sky like a huge magnifying glass. It was the hottest Sunday in my recollection. I felt as if I were the only human being left in New York. For with Laura's horrible death, I was alone. I, Waldo Lydecker, was the only one who really knew her. And I had just begun to write Laura's story when another of those detectives came to see me. I had him wait.
Just the first line, about, the night that Laura died. I mean, it's such excellent screenwriting.
The entire narration that Waldo does is so good. Like, usually monologue in that form, like a narrator, can be really cheesy, and I can really go, this has got an internal monologue, ew. But I think with Laura, it works a lot because it is him basically writing as if he's writing his column or he's talking on his radio show. So it really, I think Preminger was completely right to say that this should be all from his perspective, because then he can inject all of this really flowery language around it, but it also really shapes the narrative and really helps the payoff so much.
Yeah. And Waldo's also, I think it also works because you totally believe Waldo is the kind of person who would have interminable internal monologue and just expect people to just keep up with it and pay attention to him. That's very Waldo.
So Webb was not the only one displeased with the early rushes. In a telegram to Preminger, Zanuck described Andrews as an amateur without any sex appeal, and Webb as flying. Judith Anderson, he said, should stay on the stage, while Preminger himself should have stayed in New York or Vienna, where you belong. The apparently unimpressive early footage was the result of a truly nightmarish atmosphere on set, where Mamoulian had immediately banned Preminger from the premises, and at least according to Preminger, was seriously misdirecting the cast.
Mamoulian is not, when I think of strong performances, Mamoulian is probably not the first director that comes to mind. I don't think he's much of an actor's director.
Zanuck called Preminger and Mamoulian into what, from my reading, sounds like several meetings. Some frame it as one, but I think it was sort of a nightmare of meetings, where he asked Preminger what was going wrong with the picture. Preminger argued Mamoulian was directing the cast to overact, and went so far as to get up and demonstrate the more understated acting style he believed would benefit the script. Zanuck was impressed and asked why he hadn't explained this to Mamoulian, to which Preminger replied, "Reuben doesn't listen." At one point, even Dana Andrews was brought in on one of these meetings where Zanuck told him he should play the role more like Pat O'Brien in the 1942 crime drama musical Broadway, in which George Raft apparently plays himself. That sounds like a weird one. To which Preminger replied, "That's what I was telling Reuben." Mamoulian was infuriated by this claim, saying, "That's the lie, you did not." Much like the argument in Zanuck's office nearly a decade earlier, this escalated into a huge blowout between Preminger and Mamoulian, with Dana caught in the middle, until he eventually got permission from Zanuck to leave the room.
Fuck.
The girls are fighting.
Like, just edging towards the door, being like, "Please, may I leave?" Oh, fucking hell. Like, honestly, Preminger really should have just done, like, a full Eddie Murphy to John Landis, fucking choking him out on set.
Oh my God, yes.
Being like, "If you do that again, I will drop you." Like...
So this carried on for a few weeks, with Mamoulian turning in consistently unimpressive rushes until finally Zanuck fired him in the most humiliating way possible at lunchtime in the executive dining room in front of 18 directors and producers by saying, "I think I'll take Mamoulian off the picture." Then on the way back from lunch, Zanuck very casually informed Preminger that he could start directing, and that's how Preminger finally got full control over Laura.
The first right decision Zanuck has made.
And then another possible factor in the explosive rift was the portrait of Tierney as Laura, which plays such an iconic role in the film. The original portrait was done by Mamoulian's wife, the painter Azadia Newman, but Preminger was dissatisfied with the painting and felt it didn't capture the sense of mystery he wanted, so he replaced it with a portrait of Tierney done by studio photographer Frank Pavolny, which was airbrushed to appear more painterly. Certainly, it seems that the conflict over Mamoulian's rushes and his tendency towards a more melodramatic style of acting was the primary force behind his removal from the picture, but yeah, I think Preminger's rejection of the portrait probably didn't help.
You gotta think, what did the original portrait look like? Was it like that Italian lady when she fixed up that fresco of Jesus? Is that kind of what we think it looked like? And like Preminger's
Jean looking like a proboscis monkey.
This is like, ain't it? Like,
are there photographs that survive of
I
the
couldn't
painting?
find any. Yeah,
I would maybe none do. Maybe that painting just sucks so hard. Like, that's not to commit this to memory.
For their part, the cast had gotten along well with Mamoulian. Vincent Price described the atmosphere on his set as lovey-dovey, but Mamoulian made the transition between directors as difficult as he possibly could by telling the actors that Preminger had been displeased with their performances, which I don't think was true. He was more displeased with Mamoulian's performance. Preminger's only real ally at this point was Clifton Webb, who was grateful to Preminger for casting him and seems to have trusted him pretty implicitly from the start. The rest of the cast came around to Preminger's vision when they saw his footage. As Price recalled, the New York society depicted in the film are all darlings, sweet and charming and clever and bright on the surface, but underneath they're evil. Otto understood this in a way that Mamoulian did not. "Mamoulian is a nice man, isn't he, Vincent?" Otto asked me, and I said, "Yes, he is a nice man." Otto said, "I'm not, and most of my friends are these kinds of people." I think that was true. Otto was very given to the sort of society group of people who are basically really kind of evil people underneath.
Telling tales on himself right there, I see.
Yeah.
Throwing himself and all of his friends under the bus to justify firing Reuben Mamoulian. Don't hate the player, hate the game.
However, there was still some pretty consistent tension on set. Preminger was a notorious taskmaster. It's not a coincidence that he was repeatedly cast as a Nazi in multiple films. He even managed to frustrate the easygoing Dana Andrews with his controlling directing style. After having campaigned so hard for the role, Dana wound up making several attempts to be removed from the picture. At one point, so frustrated by Preminger's bullshit, he said, "Look, I can stay here as long as you can." The two men then sat doing absolutely nothing for 2 straight hours until Andrew's wife, Mary, arrived on set and asked why Dana wasn't working, to which Dana replied, "We're having a little disagreement." Finally, Preminger relented, and the pair had a more functional working relationship from that point on. But the workload under Preminger was still outrageous and exhausting. Jean Tierney often went days at a time without seeing natural sunlight. She was trapped on sound stages from before sunrise until late in the evening. Preminger and his cameraman, Joe Lachelle, sometimes spent hours adjusting the lighting for a single scene. In her autobiography, Tierney described Preminger as tireless, and she felt that the film's success made the effort worthwhile. Clifton Webb, on the other hand, responded poorly to the pressure. He was taking both uppers diapers and sleeping pills to keep up with the schedule, and he suffered a nervous breakdown after filming that landed him in a sanitarium.
Voluntarily putting himself on the Judy Garland diet that Louis B. Mayer had put her on for Meet Me in St. Louis. He's just like,
No, I obviously don't agree with his methods. I mean, I'm all about the proper treatment of workers and proper working hours and all of that. But I mean, when you look at the visual of the film, he did understand how to make it look good.
Yeah, the hours of adjusting lights paid off.
It paid off. Yeah. It paid off beautifully because there are some scenes that, like, the lighting is so beautiful on Dana Andrews' face, like the shadows that are cast on his face, and like you can't see his eyes, but you can only see like the slope of his nose and his jaw, and it's like that is film noir, is that look. And so many films try and emulate that mastery of light and shadow, and they don't quite get it. They confuse it and they think, oh, it means dark with a little bit of light. And it's not that. It's using light and shadow to create like a sense of mystery and a mood and like to enhance the story. And I think that they really got that in this movie. Whether he needed to work his actors that hard to achieve it, he probably didn't need to. He could have worked it out a little bit beforehand, but
why should he have to show up early to work to figure these things out?
I mean, it paid off in the end, like, because it's a beautiful film, but fucking get your shit together.
No, you get the full sense of like gray as a spectrum in Laura. Like the black and white stock is as much a character in Laura as anything else.
Yeah.
And I respect Preminger for spending endless hours scrutinizing and just poring over the visual details while also failing to ever learn how to pronounce Dana's name properly. He never learned how to say Dana. He would call him Donna. And that's just a little thing that I find very funny. It's like how Goldwyn would call Joel McCrea, who was under contract with him for like 10 years. He called him Joel.
It's just a power move.
It's a power move, exactly. And I really admire that about Preminger because Dana was so hard to ruffle that I'm sure he was just like, oh, how can I get one over on this shit-kicking Texas son of a bitch? And it was like, oh, all right, okay, all right, Donna. Anyway, continue.
So the costumes for Laura were designed by Bonnie Cashin on a budget of $15,000, which is over $200,000 today, and they were accordingly elaborate. Tierney underwent hours of fittings, and Preminger insisted upon renting real diamond and pearl jewelry.
Louise, for the last time, will you marry me?
I won't, but I saved some chicken livers for you.
Oh, you're an angel. Say, in the meantime, darling, you think you could get this spot out for me? I can afford a blemish on my character, but not on my clothes. Could need another mouth.
Webb, who was something of a famous clothes horse in his personal life, ordered Waldo's entire wardrobe directly from his favorite New York tailor.
What was it called? Harry Highpants the Tailor? Those things come up to his nipples.
Look, he's getting on in years. He's got to have everything sucked in. It's like Spanx.
He's got to cover the lines of his girdle. I mean...
Oh my God. As Webb recalled, Dana Andrews became very clothes conscious after he had seen the clothes I had worn in Laura. He asked me, what is the matter with my suits? And I told him they weren't the clothes of a gentleman, much too exaggerated, which I found was the trouble with tailors in California. They looked more like zoot suits. And the odd thing is that the moment a person would come from the west to the east, you could spot them immediately by the cut of their clothes. So he was negging Dana real hard.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Definitely.
I mean, Dana made the zoot suit work, though. Like, he cuts a fine silhouette in those huge pants.
Yeah, I think it's also because Dana has such interesting proportions. Dana is one of the people who he can wear those huge, hairy high pants while also looking, I think, very dashing. I think he's got some sort of weird, like, torso to inseam ratio that makes the whole thing work. He's got really odd proportions. Like, when we were watching it just now, I was telling Amelia in the scene when McPherson confronts Shelby over what happened during the weekend at the cabin, it's like you get to see Dana's feet, and they're fucking huge.
I'm going to murder you.
I'm just saying,
get to see Dana's feet.
They're in shoes. They're
in
not,
shoes.
Bare feet.
They're in
really
shoes.
bad. That's a bad thing to say on this podcast.
She did go into she was like, wow, they're so big and they're so wide. And I'm like,
they're like Frankenstein feet. They're like Karloff, Frankenstein's monster feet. They're really extraordinary. I recommend that everybody go back and rewatch that scene and look at Dana's flippers.
Shrek's eyes are so deep and warm.
Shut the fuck up.
There's also the question of why was Dana classed a, what is it, 4F or whatever from the army?
We're going to get into that.
Of his concave chest.
Yes, Dana's chest hole.
Chest hole, which we have gone into extensive research to try and understand what exactly that meant. And we found one split second of, I say we, but it was me, who found one split second in the film The Frogman where Dana appears shirtless. And for 1 second, the huge dog tags he's wearing, is flicked to the side. And you can kind of see that there is a depression in his chest. So
it's very pronounced.
It was very pronounced. It was real. He just kept all of his hatred for Ronald Reagan deep inside that.
I'm sorry, Todd. I don't even remember what we were talking about because we had to go into Dana Rhapsodies for a little bit. It's just...
Suits. We were talking about suits. Costuming.
Suits, right, yeah.
I was just talking about how Clifton Webb claims that he, queer-eyed Dana.
Well, that's another thing
funny.
I said, because, when Waldo he's like, well, I made her change her hair and made her dress better. And I said when we were watching it, is Waldo technically the first Queer Eye?
Yeah, he Svengali the shit out of her, but in definitely in a what not to wear kind of way.
Laura had innate breeding. But she deferred to my judgment and taste. I selected a more attractive hairdress for her. I taught her what clothes were more becoming to her.
It's so funny. I don't know, that whole dynamic is so funny. But yeah, no, Dana also, just because we have to always inject Dana stuff. Yeah, Dana definitely, he learned, I guess, that kind of clothes horse habit from Webb, because he became very particular about how he dressed, and he had a lot of very expensive clothes, and Dana liked to look nice after working with Clifton Webb. Webb taught him, despite being a full-grown adult that Dana was at this point, how to wear clothes that didn't make him look like an idiot.
Along with the portrait of Laura, perhaps the most enduring aspect of the film is its score. The head of music at Fox was Alfred Newman, who, like many directors who had turned down the project, felt Laura was too messy of a production and wanted nothing to do with it. So he assigned the project to the young composer David Raksin. Raksin had begun his career composing on Broadway on a recommendation from George Gershwin and had worked with Chaplin on the score for Modern Times in 1936, but he had yet to really spearhead a major film score on his own. For the movie's principal theme, Preminger wanted to use Duke Ellington's Sophisticated Lady, which Raksin argued was too popular. They also considered Gershwin's Summertime, but they couldn't get the rights, so it fell to Raksin to compose an original theme. As he recalled, "Coincidentally, that Saturday, I received a letter of farewell from a lady I was in love with. I put the letter on my piano on Sunday evening, and it was on my mind as I began to compose. The tune came to me, the melody of our theme song needed to evoke melancholy, and I had just been given a hearty dose. He played it for Preminger, who was impressed, saying, 'I don't know much about music, but I like this. Let's put it in.'"
It's such a good score. I'm sorry.
No, it's really good.
It's such a good score. Out of all the films from before that point, I'm can name a few scores that I like, but not on the same level. They don't have the same impact on me as the score of Laura. I just think it's such a complete score that it's just so good. It's so good. And I mean, it's only one melody throughout the entire film that's just been treated in different ways to convey different moods.
Yeah.
It's slightly adapted to be at a party, or it's slightly adapted to be an intense moment. But it's just so good.
And the groove remix.
The groove remix is extremely good as well.
Raxon's Laura theme was hugely successful upon the film's release. Fox received so many requests for a recording of the song that Johnny Mercer was hired to write lyrics for it, and it quickly became a standard. Vincent Price remembered seeing the film for the first time and being blown away by the music, which he called marvelous, while Hedy Lamarr, when asked why she had turned down the role of Laura, commented, "They sent me the script, not the score." No less than Cole Porter described the theme from Laura as the romantic ballad he most wished he had written himself. It's good as hell. I mean, we were trying a couple weeks ago, Amelia, to think of other scores from that era that we loved, and it was just head and shoulders above the rest, I think.
Oh yeah, I definitely I bought it from the iTunes store because I love it so much, and I will just listen to it because it's so evocative and it really puts you in a certain kind of mood, and it's a very obviously noir mood. It makes you feel so much more than a lot of scores that came out at that time. I mean, obviously films did at that point have some semblance of score. If they weren't a musical film, perhaps their scores weren't as impactful. But this one definitely had a long-lasting impact that so many other films just failed to have.
Yeah, and especially at Fox. I'm trying to think of Fox pictures that have really notable scores, and there's not. I don't know if this is a classic example of Fox not being willing to shell out the talent, or maybe I'm talking out of my ass, but I'm trying to think of some, and only How Green Was My Valley comes to mind. That's a famous score, and it's well done, but I don't think anything on the level of success of Laura, because the score from Laura is so famous that I think a lot of people who have never seen the movie have heard a rendition of the main theme at some point in their lives. Sinatra
Definitely.
recorded it. Yeah, it became such a standard that it's how a little piece of the movie lives on in pop culture. And it's a testament to how well crafted it is that it's still relevant, sonically all these years later.
Against all odds, Preminger finally produced a rough cut of Laura that was screened for Daryl Zanuck, who, unsurprisingly, because nothing could ever be easy with Zanuck, decided the entire final third of the film was unusable and had to be reshot. Zanuck's vision saw the whole movie revealed to have been a dream, but not Dana's dream, as you might suspect. Rather, it was going to be Lydecker's dream, with Laura stating in voiceover, "Nothing was true, it had all been in Waldo Lydecker's imagination."
That's so stupid.
I know.
That's just him being like, and it was all a dream. Bye.
Yeah. The Saint Elsewhere ending where it's all happening inside of a snow globe.
Oh, fucking hell.
It's the dumbest possible. I hate it when people interpret the movie as being a dream of McPherson's. That's a personal pet peeve of mine because I think, first of all, it's so obvious and so lazy. And second of all, fuck off. I don't know. Just something about that particular, it comes across as being so smug, well, actually, it could just be a dream. McPherson could have just dreamt the whole thing and just fantasized. And it's okay, all right, well, what do you gain from that? What greater significance and symbolism and meaning do you derive from that? None.
Well, I think, see, this is one of the points we're going to disagree. I like that there is the possibility that you could interpret it that way.
No, I like the ambiguity, yeah.
I don't necessarily like that interpretation of it, but I like that it creates this, what if, but I also like the fact that the real twist is not it was all a dream or it was his dream or whatever, that the twist is actually really central to the plot and makes sense in that context, not just something left of center being and it was, all in his head the whole time. He just really wanted to fuck that corpse.
Yeah, I feel like if there wasn't the twist at the end, that interpretation would be more valid. Because if it did turn out to be Shelby or whatever, then it would be more interesting. It would be more interesting in terms of an interpretation.
Yeah.
But I think that I don't know. It just gets my goat. It's just it's just one of those things.
I think it's the fact that so many male critics are always salivating to be well, I think you'll find it was actually this. And it's actually, I don't care what you have to say or what you think at all ever. So I don't know why you're telling me.
I think there's also a little bit of an implication that maybe Waldo is not strong enough to commit a murder, or that men who seek to possess women in the way that Waldo seeks to possess Laura aren't actually dangerous and violent, or maybe that a relationship between somebody like Laura and McPherson, because again, there's that whole like anti-Chad thing, and Dana is nothing if not a Chad. And male critics resent Chads very deeply. So maybe they prefer this vision in which, Chad Fearson gets, screwed out of his beautiful corpse wife.
Yeah,
that's just my theory.
I would have to agree. Like, critics, particularly male ones, would feel like a bit not all men about like Waldo being capable of doing something like that. When as a woman, you know that that's more than likely something that could very easily happen to you or somebody that you know, because men are fucking scum.
Yeah, and I feel like a part of that, maybe that, I don't know if it's, I overuse the phrase cultural context, but I think we've lost it in the sense, I think people are maybe more eager to accept the idea of McPherson as being like a clear audience stand-in than maybe people were at the time. I think we look at the movie in too much of a black and white thing in the sense that McPherson is obviously the hero, and he's obviously the protagonist of the narrative in the sense that he is the one who quite literally brings Laura back to life. But I don't know, I don't think, again, in large part because we're also looking at a perspective of knowing that Dana Andrews is going to become a real movie star after this. Dana is not maybe whom people are going to assume that Gene Tierney is going to end up with. Maybe it's just a little bit of that casting oddity at play. Maybe people think, well, I don't know, maybe Vincent Price is going to swoop in. I mean, I don't know. I think we look back at it and assume that there's a more straightforward narrative than there really is in the movie, which I think undermines or at least detracts from some of the really elegant ambiguity at play there.
Both Tierney and Andrews were brought in to record narration in accordance with Caspery's multiple narrator device, which Preminger had very intentionally removed, and a new ending was shot. Preminger's sort of guardian angel in this final struggle was the columnist Walter Winchell, who attended a screening of the new rough cut and enjoyed it greatly, telling Zanuck, "Big time, Daryl, big time, but the ending, I didn't get it. You've got to change it." So Zanuck immediately turned to Preminger and told him to go with the original ending.
You also I think multiple narrators is a shit way to do this particular film, because then you lose the what is it? It's a bit like a transformation sequence. The scene in which we're obviously going to discuss because I think it's a lot of people's favorite scene in the movie, when McPherson is alone in Laura's apartment and he's drinking some of that cheap-ass Black Pony, and he sits there and he kind of stares up at the portrait and right before he falls asleep, but when he's walking around, and Dana's got this really lovely little bit of action where he goes over into her bedroom and he looks in her drawers and he pulls out some of her like silky, lacy things, and then he like sniffs her perfume, but it doesn't feel like predatory or invasive in any way. It feels really magical, almost like it's a bit like fairy tale like, and that whole sequence in which you can just see McPherson fall in love with Laura is so significant. And I feel like with multiple narration, you would lose all of that emotional mystery that's built up throughout the whole movie, because you're always guessing about people's motivations, and there's nothing that kills suspense faster than having somebody unnecessarily illuminate what is going on in the scene.
Yeah, it's like just adding too much exposition, and I think that a film would really suffer from that. I think that a lot of the strength of this narration that we do have is that it's so unreliable, and that just adds to the mystery later on. But I also think in that scene where McPherson is roaming through the apartment, he falls asleep so fast. He's like, you think he's got all these worries on his mind. He's, very troubled about these recent developments in his case, and he falls asleep in like 3 fucking seconds like that. Well, I'm like, boy, I wish I was resting that easy.
He drank a fuckload of bourbon though, because he invites Waldo and Anne and Shelby to all have a little bit, because he's trying to suss out whose drink of choice it is, and then he's popping them back like it's a cherry Coke or something. I mean, Dana really tosses it back, and then it's like, well, damn, no fucking wonder.
Yeah, I mean, but also I think this is another thing that I really enjoy, that Dana's characterization of McPherson, even though Dana can't say his own character's name, I just like to say that. He says it twice in the movie wrong.
Hand me that washcloth, please, Mr.
McPherson.
McPherson. McPherson. Mark McPherson. McPherson.
Lieutenant McPherson.
McPherson. McPherson, tell me. McPherson?
Mark McPherson. Mr. McPherson.
Well, McPherson? Hey, McPherson?
This is McPherson. Any calls come through?
He gives off this air that he doesn't give a shit about anything that's happening. Like he'll play his little like game when he's listening to them talk, but you can tell that he is listening and he's jumping to conclusions and he's making observations and he's doing all of that. But I just like that he will not engage with that, high society bullshit that Clifton and Vincent are so deeply set on doing. I really like that kind of tension that it creates throughout the movie. Like that initially you think, oh, he's this tough, like, cop. He's really rough around the edges. He just doesn't fit in. He's, all of that shit that Clifton is spewing about him. Like, he's this horrible man. But you can tell that he's working with a kind of finesse that neither of the other men in the picture possess.
And they totally underestimate him and his intellect. And Waldo treats him as a little bit of a curiosity when he refers to him as like the man with a leg full of lead. And I think Dana also, and this is across Dana's whole filmography, but particularly Laura, he embodies so well this particular like generational emotional repression that is so common amongst like men of the greatest generation. And there are little tiny nods to McPherson having something boiling a little bit under the surface, like when Waldo is snapping at him for playing with his little baseball game and distracting him, and then McPherson's like, well, it keeps me calm.
Will you please stop dawdling with that infernal puzzle? It's getting on my nerves.
I know, but it keeps me calm. Okay, let's go.
And when he's just, again, tossing back those belts of Black Pony, or when Laura walks to the door and his response to her, evidently, apparently not being a necrophiliac. And when she says that she doesn't understand how she could ever have been in love with Shelby. And then there's like this really brief, like, relief breaks across his face, and then it immediately vanishes. And it's so subtle and it's so quick.
I know that you went away to make up your mind whether you would marry Shelby Carpenter or not. What did you decide? I want the truth.
I decided not to marry him.
I'll see you in the morning. Good night.
Good night.
Again, Dana is just such a good actor, and I think a big part of it is that he's acting for the big screen. He's acting for the only way in which people saw movies at this particular point in time. And there's so much subtlety to that performance, and he's so tightly wound. That's what he's so coiled, I guess, a bit like a snake, and it's so fascinating to me. I mean, the fact that he summarizes his whole attitude towards the world when Waldo asks him if there are any women who aren't dames or dolls, and he just goes, a doll in Washington Heights once got a fox fur out of me. I mean, it's...
McPherson, tell me, why did they have to photograph her in that horrible condition?
When a dame gets killed, she doesn't worry about how she looks.
Will you stop calling her a dame? Look around. Is this the home of a dame? Look at her.
Not bad.
Jacoby was in love with her when he painted it. But he never captured her vibrance, her warmth. Have you ever been in love?
A doll in Washington Heights once got a fox fur out of me.
Ever know a woman who wasn't a doll or a dame?
Yeah, one. But she kept walking me past furniture windows to look at the parlor suites.
It's a perfect union of dialogue and characterization and performance. And I can't imagine this part with anyone other than Dana in it.
John Hodiak.
Fuck John Hodiak. My God, I can't even the last time I watched a John Hodiak movie. I feel bad for John Hodiak. Like, what a footnote. Can you imagine being the guy who lost out on the lead in Laura? I mean, sucks to suck, I guess. Laird Krieger didn't care because then he was dead, so.
Yeah, he died like right after.
Yeah.
Laura was released in October 1944, 6 months after shooting commenced. It was a critical success, a box office hit, shot for $1 million, grossing twice that. And it received 5 Academy Award nominations: Best Director, Best Art Direction, Best Screenplay, Best Supporting Actor for Clifton Webb, and Best Photography for Joe Lachelle, who won. Webb described a phenomenon on the 20th Century Fox lot which was referred to as the Laura Luck, so named because Laura catapulted Dana Andrews to leading man status, allowed Preminger to resume his career as a director, and secured Tierney a new and improved contract. The Laura Company would reunite in several iterations through the years. For example, Preminger and Andrews worked together again on Fallen Angel in 1945 and Daisy Canyon in 1947, Preminger and Tierney on Whirlpool in 1949, and all three in Where the Sidewalk Ends in 1950, but of course none of those really replicated Laura.
Well, I mean, I really like Whirlpool, and I also really like Where the Sidewalk Ends. I think they're good.
Yeah.
I
feel like Where the Sidewalk Ends has a couple Dana foot shots. I seem to recall there being some big shoe content in that, but and then
it's a good movie. I really like Where the Sidewalk Ends, especially because all the scenes that are shot in that is an Italian restaurant. Like, it's a really kitschy kind of little restaurant that Dana always goes to, and then he brings Jean Tierney into it, and like the owner's like, I see you've got a girl with you. So it's like,
you fucking
I really like that it feels so different from Laura, in the fact that in Laura, outside of the case, McPherson doesn't really have a life, whereas in Where the Sidewalk Ends, he has a whole life. I mean, it's obviously not the same character, but like it's just such a reversal of that dynamic that was working in Laura. It's just all mixed up in Where the Sidewalk Ends. I think that's what I like about it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I didn't mean to like cast aspersions on it. I think it's a great movie too.
I mean, it wasn't as nowhere near as commercially successful as Laura. So yeah, it's an astute observation.
It's also, I think, one of the really remarkable aspects. I love seeing, different bits and pieces of the Laura cast, reunited in different pictures, because I think for me at least, part of the great joy of the studio system is being able to see different permutations of the same actors in different roles and in different situations. Like, I love to bookend, Jean and Vincent Price in this with, Leave Her to Heaven, which has got such a fascinating dynamic because it's so distinct from the dynamic between Laura and Shelby. And you get to see this whole other like level of emotional range, but through like the magic of like how the human brain interprets, sights and sounds, it's like, oh, hey, it's them. And you're like, yeah, brain, congratulations. And that's also part of the what makes Where the Sidewalk Ends so, I think, fun and rewatchable for me. I love all these performers together. It's such a shame that we never got, like Laura 2 Electric Boogaloo, because even though it would have sucked dick, it's also so fun. I mean, just the four of them, Jean and Dana and Vincent Price and Clifton Webb sparring is just like endlessly like delectable for me. I love Jean Tierney. What a magical person.
Tierney. Oh.
We have to do Leave Her to Heaven too. I love that movie.
Just letting that little bitch drown.
What are you trying to do? Force a confession out of me?
You've been holding out, and I want to know why. It'll be easier for you if you tell the truth.
What difference does it make what I say? You've made up your mind I'm guilty.
She's so she's such a great actress, and obviously she's extremely beautiful in like literally every lighting situation, which is crazy. But she's underrated, I guess, in the fact that people were just like, oh, she's the really beautiful one. And it's like, well, I mean, I guess she is very beautiful, but also people always say, oh, she's no Katharine Hepburn. And it was like, well, I mean, she doesn't have to be. Like, the roles that she did take and that she made her own are extremely good, and she's extremely watchable in all of those roles. Like, even in the Love is News remake, That Wonderful Urge, she's extremely watchable in that. I don't know why she's not as esteemed as so many others in her peer group.
People are hostile towards Jean's particular beauty. I think people find it intimidating. And no, it's not because of its flaws. People always make jokes about the overbite, but I think there's something that strikes a chord with people in Jean's face that just, I think people find it, there's something about it. It's like, meanwhile, there's this endless PR campaign to like rebrand Grace Kelly as a great actress, you know, and people fall for that. I mean, again, no shade. I just don't think that Grace is like exactly
the second time that you've gone in on Grace Kelly.
I don't accept mediocrity unless it's coming out of a slim Canadian twink. Okay, I'm not down for it. But no, I don't know. I think people are afraid of Jean. I think there's something in her that's just so like reckless and wild and beautiful. And again, not to bring too much of her personal struggle into this, because that's what she's been reduced to so much in terms of critical analysis. But there's so much depth to her as a performer, I think in large part because of her issues with mental illness off screen. And it's the same thing with like somebody like Frances Farmer. People are still interested in Frances Farmer, and they find, you know, kinship with Frances Farmer, knowing that her life went to absolute fucking shit over the fact that she couldn't get adequate treatment for her mental illness at the time in which she lived. But I don't think that Jean has had that moment yet. I don't think people have really realized that. And I don't think that she's touched that new generation of people who can find some solace in that. And I think she's kind of reduced, I think, to a tragic figure in a lot of ways that aren't really fair, because she brought so much to the screen. And I don't know what it is.
I think it just comes down to that people are very stupid.
Yeah.
And can't do or think anything correctly. I mean, it's frustrating to see. I mean, it happens with so many stars, especially in particular pockets of people who are interested in these movies. They really love talking about the tragedy of stars' lives. They really love like going into all that and be like, oh, it must have been so hard, and like not actually appreciating them as a complex individual who experienced a multitude of things, not just the misery of their lives. Like, it happens a lot with people like Marilyn Monroe and Judy Garland. Like, people love festering in that negative and miserable side of these stars' lives when, well, these people did have successes and they did have joys and they did have careers that are worth more than you reducing them completely to their suffering.
Jean is a great movie star, and I'm waiting for her to get. I think Hayworth is probably the best comparison to what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Rita Hayworth. People underrating Rita's gifts because she is so magnetic and so beautiful. But I think part of the reason is because both Jean and Rita aren't beautiful in a way that's icy and far off and distant, and so they don't get humanized the same way that people have attempted to humanize, again, a Grace Kelly. Because people find something like, that people are attracted to like the unknowability, you know, the ineffable beauty of somebody like a Grace Kelly, whereas I think Jean is just a little too close to home, so people feel like a rivalry with her. I think taps into that whole like competition with your older sister kind of thing. I don't know. Jean looks like somebody who bullied a lot of people in high school, I guess, is what I'm trying to say here.
So the friendship that had begun between Dana Andrews and Clifton Webb on the first day of shooting in the bathtub also endured. One letter from Webb to Andrews sent in 1947 and printed in the Andrews biography Hollywood Enigma by Carl Rawlinson read, quote, "Just in case, dear boy, you may feel all hot and slightly bothered with a violent desire to vomit on the 13th of this month, it will simply mean that your vibrations are at an unusually high pitch, for the simple reason that this is the day I am arriving at Pasadena complete en suite. I shall proceed in an armored car to a tiny villa that I have taken in Bel Air. I am informed by my tiny spies that it is all two, so I expect to be very happy. I shall also expect you to give up your entire time to me from that date on." I love that.
I love Webb. That's
that's the other point that I've written down in my notes. Like, I said, are we to believe any of these men are straight? Like in the movie, like just all the scenes they're together, they're completely ignoring all the females in the room.
Yeah, that's part of why I think it's so funny, and not funny, I guess, but like predictable that Zanuck was a little wary of Webb, because Webb, so we don't believe Webb as Waldo as being like an adequate like sexual suitor for Laura, because it's like so much more complicated, and it's about like possession, but not in like the pedestrian erotic sense of like a straight man wanting to possess a woman. It's like this whole entire like body and soul possession. It's this Pygmalion, complex that he has going on. And the performance that this most reminds me of, oddly enough, is Laird Krieger, but it's Laird Krieger in this Gun for Hire. Because
what a good fucking movie.
I know. Because his dynamic with Alan Ladd is so fascinating. When he's asking Alan Ladd how it feels to kill someone, and he's like sucking on a spoon, and he's like, how does it feel when you're doing it? And then he does that little like gasp, like little shiver thing. I mean, oh God. It's so much of a similar vibe, injecting that like almost like morbid sexual interest. I don't know. Webb is just such a fascinating person. He has such a fascinating screen persona, and he's an interesting antidote to the earlier generations of older gay and bi actors you have in Hollywood who have to develop kind of like an asexual screen persona after the code. When you have like your Edward Everett Hortons or your Franklin Pangborns, where they might end up in ironic, gender reversals or whatever, but it's always about like a prissiness, that's what it's about. But Webb has this like fascinating way of looking at a male co-star that is like indisputably sexual, but he doesn't look at all at Gene that way, and it's just such an interesting dynamic between the characters in this movie. His crush on Dana is so palpable, and also I guess is a little bit of a crush on Price, who I guess he probably would have had a better shot with, knowing what we know now about Price's personal predilections. But I like the fact that he wanted him a slice of that.
It's the same obvious pattern, Laura. If McPherson weren't muscular and handsome in a cheap sort of way, you'd see through him in a second.
He wanted to fill that chest hole. He wanted to fill that chest hole with his love.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Oh.
No.
Wanted to take a good old dip in that chest hole.
You're supposed to go, put a dip?
Like, no.
Like a nacho dip?
Take
like an onion
dip.
artichoke?
Like he was in that fucking bathtub for 2 days.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Todd, are you gonna say the exact words that Webb employed to assess Dana's interest in him? Do you have those in your notes?
Yeah, I do. According to Dana's daughter, Susan, it's likely that Dana knew Webb had a crush on him and, quote, played up to it. And at one point, Webb apparently told Dana to shit or get off the pot, but they were never more than friends, so I guess he got off the pot.
So Webb just interpreting this whole, like, basic friendliness as flirtation. Or maybe Dana was getting a little flirty.
I mean, what we know about Dana, he probably was just working it to his advantage, just like he did to get the role.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think also one of the things that, again, because I'm just like I can't stop. If it's wrong to love Dana, I don't want to be right, but he is somebody who he had such a strong appreciation for people of like integrity and like intellect, and he knew that like Webb also found like the whole situation vaguely ridiculous, and that movie acting was kind of ridiculous and kind of embarrassing, as like an occupation for a grown man. And I think he admired Webb's talent, and I don't know. Dana strikes me as somebody who is like genuinely admires the people that he works with. And I think that's why he had such a good relationship with so many of the people who directed him. He understood that there was a common pursuit there, and then I guess Webb may or may not have thought that meant that he was going to get lucky. I don't really know. Should have gone for Vincent Price. I don't know what he was thinking there.
I think if the question was posed to you, we'd know who you'd pick. So can we blame him?
No, you can't blame him. Dana is so beautiful. And again, I'm sorry, Todd. I'm hijacking your episode and turning it like into the Dana hour.
You're doing this like we're never going to talk about another Dana film again.
I know. I
have Crack in the World on my list to do.
Oh God. I just wanted to say, particularly the lighting in this movie, because again, the lighting was Oscar worthy, is that Dana has a really interesting face. And by that, I mean that his face is all like planes, like all like unbroken planes. And there's no like wasted space in terms of the camera. Light doesn't get trapped. And he's like a disco ball. There's his little shark eyes. And then there's this kind of a little fold going from the base of his nostril, sort of towards his mouth. And that's really it. Otherwise, he has like almost like a oddly smooth skin, and the light washes across him in the way that the light would wash across somebody like a Garbo or something. Like the planes of light, the way that the light plays on his face is very similar, I guess, to a Dietrich or something. It's interesting. He's got very tight skin. Maybe he doesn't moisturize enough, but
it's just that all that hot Texas air.
Yeah, and all the booze drying him out from the inside. But I don't know. Dana's face really amazes me. I don't remember who wrote this because it's been so long since I read it, but somebody, some critic somewhere in the world made a really good point when talking about how Jimmy Stewart, because Jimmy Stewart, if you've ever seen Jimmy Stewart's eyes in color, they're very striking. But even when you see them in black and white, there's a certain clarity to them that allows the light to play on his eyes in intriguing ways, and that works to his advantage as a movie star. And I just think it's the same way with the shape of Dana's skull, quite frankly. The light plays with him in really interesting ways. And so you see it across all of his films, really no matter the exact genre. It works well in noir. Works well in war films. It works well in westerns. He looks really beautiful in the Oxbow incident, which has a very particular style of lighting. I don't know. I think it's an incredibly versatile face is what I'm trying to say here.
Now who's the necrophile?
You two are so mean to me. And who are you going to have to say inadequate and also, I meant to say inaccurate. Who's gonna do all these verbal flubs all the time and also be wrong about Zazu Pitts?
I don't know. I'm pretty good at both of those things.
Oh, goddamn. Who's going to talk about feet?
I was going to say, effectively, you're saying that Dana Andrews, arguably the only man you've ever loved, is a shark-eyed disco ball with big feet.
That is exactly it. Yeah, Dana is the only man I've ever loved, and he is a shark-eyed disco ball with big feet. So thank you. Oh, can I just say a little joke right here? Because I don't want you to cut it out, and I figure if I leave it in here, you're going to forget. A note that I made that says, when Waldo sees McPherson looking at his grandfather clock, I noticed his attention was fixed upon my Glock. I thought I would spring a Glock beam on you just while you were at your most vulnerable point. Anyway, continue with this episode. You can cut that out.
It's funny because later on he does whip out a gun from the clock.
Yeah. So, wish it was a Glock. It would be better if it was a Glock, but I don't know if Glocks existed back then. Did Glocks exist in 1944?
I don't think so.
Oh, that's a shame.
I mean, don't take that as read because I know next to nothing about guns.
Yeah. Again, we, much like Dana, are leftists and we don't know the basic. Oh, also, while we're just talking about stuff, as I interrupt all of everything Todd's ever attempted to give structure for, I also think it's fascinating that Price is so much more believable as a gigolo than Ben Lyons. You believe that women are chasing Vincent Price down for sex, and probably because he's like 6'4". That might be it. And he's got that cute little Southern accent in this when he says things like, "I'm not the conventional type."
That gets me every time. Vincent Price with the Southern accent is so jarring. Like, it's just not what you expect to hear from him. And I guess that's probably closer to his actual situation, but
yes, it's exactly. It's like, it's so weird hearing things like that, but it works so. He pulls that whole like simpering Southern Belle thing so well in this movie. And again, how are we supposed to believe any of these men are heterosexual?
Tierney herself, in her autobiography, gives perhaps the most succinct evaluation of Laura and its unexpected success. She regarded the character of Laura as unattainable, calling her the kind of woman I admired in the pages of Vogue as a young girl. She often downplayed her own performance, referring to herself mostly as a symbol, the unspeaking, hauntingly beautiful portrait on the wall that captivates Mark McPherson. And while I personally disagree with that assessment, I certainly agree with her further judgment that, quote, to analyze it further is like trying to explain air. Laura had the chemistry. We were a mixture of second choices. Me, Clifton, Dana, the song, the portrait. If it worked, it was because the ingredients turned out to be right. Otto held us together, pushed and lifted what might have been a good movie into one that became something special. And that's all I have.
Well, that's a good summary. What more do you need? You got a girl, you got a gun, you got an anonymous, semi-anonymous dead woman with her face blown off down there in the morgue wearing someone else's lingerie.
And you got a disinterested man with a chest hole to sort it all out. So, what more indeed? Well, I guess that's another one in the can.
Yeah, I guess so.
As always, you can check our non-existent links. We have to sort this out.
We could already have a Quip deal by now. Cry myself to sleep every night thinking about that.
Don't burn our sponsors before we even have them.
No, I'm saying I'm crying myself to sleep with the fact that we don't have a Quip deal. I love Quip, and I would gladly accept their money to buy more Dana Andrews
Quip are my best
memorabilia. Fuck off.
Oh, well, thanks for listening. Leave a positive review. Another wonderful job of research. Thanks.
Yes, good job, Todd.
Good job, Todd.
I'm going to have to re-record a lot of that, but it's okay.
It's okay. You also have to edit out everything else I said.
This is the second episode we're recording in a weekend, so it's a record for us, technically.
Yeah.
All right, catch you on the flip side.
Bye.
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 I'm trying to think of an intelligent response that you could edit in there in terms of when I was trying to think about something you could describe Zanuck as. You might just want to cut it down to me comparing him to Goldwyn. That was stupid.
Well, yeah, I think we'll cut out the bit where you say he's chewing through vaginas or whatever the fuck you said.
That's how he cast all of his movies. He would go to Europe and he'd be like, oh, well, I slept with her, so now you got to put her in a movie. And then the directors at Fox would be like, oh, fuck. So I guess I'm just going to turn that Judith Anderson part into a long-limbed Serbian 23-year-old, I guess.